Wali Itzapong M. Sitwen, Basit P. Walawe Jit Bejideo Jiskuk. Hello, bonjour. Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm honored to be with you here today. Thank you to co-chairs Weena Siwi, Adam Fiddler, and Haley Rose for hosting us here in Jibpugtug on Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral unceded land of the Mi'kmaq, and the territory of the Peace and Friendship Treaties. We honor and recognize all those who have lived on these lands since time immemorial and continue to do so today. It's my pleasure to be here today to focus on the way forward in our shared journey toward reconciliation and justice for First Nations. Just over 2 years ago, our government and Indigenous partners stood together to mark the passage of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. Once the UN Declaration Act came into force, we knew that our next challenge was to work together to develop an action plan to achieve the objectives of the UN Declaration. Last month, at the request of Indigenous leadership, we came together on National Indigenous Peoples Day to announce the tabling in Parliament and the public release of the action plan. C'était un honneur pour moi d'annoncer l'achèvement de cette étape du processus aux côtés de leaders des Premières Nations, des Inuits et de Métis de partout au Canada. Le potentiel et les opportunités offertes par le plan d'action dépassent les mots dans ces pages. C'est un reflet de la grande diversité de voix, de perspectives et de priorités des peuples autochtones. Le plan contient aussi l'engagement du Canada envers un document qui porte bien son nom, un plan d'action. It's not a perfect document, nor is it finished in any way. Rather, it's a living roadmap, or as Regional Chief TG says, an evergreen document. It will continue to evolve in consultation, in cooperation, and in co-development with Indigenous peoples. I know this Assembly wanted more time for engagement, for oversight, and for review of the action plan. But it's important to remember that the 2-year time frame was built into the legislation at the urging of First Nations leadership. And the action plan itself contains the process by which it will continue to evolve. The Action Plan Advisory Committee will advise and assist with the implementation of the action plan, and you will appoint the First Nations members. So what's in the plan? It includes 181 individual measures aimed at achieving the objectives of the UN Declaration and advancing reconciliation in a tangible way. These include measures to address injustices, prejudice, violence, systemic racism and discrimination, and provide for monitoring the implementation of the plan over time. The action plan also reflects the priorities of First Nations identified during the consultation and cooperation process. These include measures that relate to self-determination, self-government, participation in decision-making by Indigenous peoples, including relation to lands, territories, and resources, the honourable implementation of all Crown Indigenous treaties, economic reconciliation, and the revitalization of languages and cultures, among others. The plan also identifies key next steps to build on our work with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis to ensure that federal laws are made consistent with the UN Declaration over time. The plan contemplates the co-development of new independent mechanisms for holding Canada accountable for implementation. Note the plural there, mechanisms, not mechanism. One size does not fit all. Look at the diversity in this room. Monitoring, oversight, recourse, and remedies will have distinctions. The work to renew and revise the action plan will be done together with you as befits a course-correcting or evergreen document. We faced a hard deadline to complete the action plan. With that work complete, we have a new starting point for our ongoing work together to set a more hopeful, healthier, and more equitable course that benefits all Indigenous peoples from coast to coast to coast. As I said, it's not perfect, But I'm optimistic that this is a truly positive step and that this action plan provides us with a very good roadmap to move forward. In addition to this important milestone, last month the government introduced legislation to uphold Section 35 rights through a non-derogation clause, or NDC, in the Federal Interpretation Act. The proposed legislation, Bill S-13, is a long time coming for many First Nations, Inuit and Métis who have called for a clause in the Federal Interpretation Act that would apply to all federal laws. The bill's aim is to ensure that federal legislation is interpreted in a way that respects Section 35 of the Constitution, upholding Aboriginal and treaty rights. À l'heure actuelle, des dispositions de non-dérogation figurent parmi plusieurs lois fédérales. L'adoption éventuelle du projet de loi S-13 démontrera clairement notre travail pour assurer que toutes les lois fédérales soient conformes à la déclaration. Alors que le projet de loi avancera au Sénat et à la Chambre des communes cet automne, je m'engage à continuer le dialogue avec les Premières Nations pour son passage rapide. Il y a longtemps que vous attendiez. Finally, I want to highlight another important milestone along our reconciliation journey. On June 16th, the Independent Special Interlocutor for Missing Children and Unmarked Graves and Burial Sites associated with Indian residential schools, Ms. Kimberly Murray, delivered her one-year interim report. This document captures the tremendous work and extensive engagement that the Special Interlocutor has undertaken in the first year of her mandate. The work has included meetings and national gatherings with survivors, Indigenous families, and communities, with First Nations, Inuit and Métis leaders and Indigenous organizations, with federal, provincial, and territorial governments, church entities, non-governmental organizations, and others. I was honored to meet many survivors at the Special Interlocutor's Toronto gathering. Her report was presented at Cowessess First Nation, another gathering of survivors, and I was privileged to speak at the event. I have read the Special Interlocutor's interim report, and I am absorbing the findings. It lays the groundwork for her ongoing work to develop her final recommendations by next summer. These recommendations will be critical for putting in place a federal legal framework to ensure the respectful and culturally appropriate treatment of unmarked graves and burial sites of children who attended former Indian residential schools. We know we still have much work to do to address the legacy of residential schools and advance reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. We can't change what happened or undo intergenerational harms that survivors and families are still living with today. But we can and must remain firm in our commitment to respond to TRC's 94 calls to action, ever mindful of the need to advance justice and protect the rights, respect, and dignity of the children. Finally, the Department of Justice continues to make progress on the development of an Indigenous justice strategy, again in consultation and cooperation with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We're also collaborating with the provinces and territories. La surreprésentation des peuples autochtones dans le système de justice du Canada est un enjeu complexe, découlant du racisme systémique et de l'héritage du colonialisme. La stratégie en matière de justice autochtone présente une occasion de créer un système de justice qui reconnaît et qui respecte les droits, la culture, les lois, les coutumes et les traditions des peuples autochtones du Canada. Bringing this closer to the ground, I know that we have to address the vulnerability that many Indigenous peoples feel even in their own communities. An important step in addressing that feeling is working together to develop the Indigenous justice strategy. I launched a second wave of engagement with Indigenous partners on the strategy in April of this year, meeting with elders and youth. Going forward, First Nations, chiefs, communities will be key partners for the department. I'm grateful for your collaboration and commitment thus far, and even more grateful for further collaboration as we move forward with this important work. As I've said many times, reconciliation is a generational journey. Undoing 150 years of colonialism doesn't happen in the lifetime of a single government. The reflexes that have defined Crown Indigenous relationships are centuries old. Rewiring them will take a lot of time and a lot of hard work, as well as a spirit of partnership, to which I and my government continue to be wholly committed. Our work will come to build on our treaties, by the recommendations made by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, by the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, and the UN Declaration Action Plan. All of these are mutually reinforcing as we move forward. Together, we can move forward in the spirit of lasting reconciliation and healing. We can finally begin to walk the path in mutual respect and as true partners, as our treaties tell us. Walaleo nemolduk sib. So, megwich, merci, thank you.
Thank you very much, Miigwech, Minister Lametti. So we have just under 15 minutes, so I will take, we can take 4 speakers. Again, we will follow the order around the room and then go online. So with that, I will start with microphone 1, 2, 3, and then go online. If not, we'll come back this way. Microphone 1, go ahead.
I'm Derek Niepenak, Chief of the Minigozzibi Anishinaabe in the Treaty 4 territory. Good morning, Minister Lametti.
Good morning.
Over the years, we've brought the issue of Section 207 of Canada's Criminal Code into the discussion. Section 207 provides an exemption to provincial jurisdictions in the establishment of lottery and gambling schemes across Canada. The provinces have used those jurisdictions to create windfalls for themselves annually. And in Manitoba, there's hundreds of millions of dollars of windfall in gaming that the provincial government enjoys. That exemption is also used to stamp out Indigenous gaming mechanisms. When Canada can't control Indigenous people, they criminalize us. And our early ventures into gaming resulted in criminalization of a lot of our gaming schemes. UNDRIP and the action plan includes a provision to recognize reform in provincial gaming schemes, which includes the space for Indigenous regulation and law in gaming and gambling. Bill S-268, which is currently before the Senate, is a private member's bill. It's brought by a Conservative senator, and it does have the opportunity of making it into the House of Commons before the next election. I'm asking you, Minister Lametti, Bill S-268 allows for that exemption to be extended to Indigenous governments to establish their own regulations and legal schemes within the constitutional framework to allow for full economic participation of Indigenous communities across the country. I'm asking your government, as low-hanging fruit in the implementation of the action plan, to support Bill S-268 and sponsor it as a government bill once it hits the floor in the House of Commons. I think you have the power to do that. And it is low-hanging fruit in the action plan, and it would be a quick win for your government in terms of making space for us to participate fully and within our own regulatory and legal schemes in gaming and lotteries. Miigwech.
Microphone 2.
Good morning. Chief Cold Lake First Nation. I really like what Mr. Niepenak said. I want to talk about this NRTA. Why are we beggars in our own land? Right? We're the original people here. You know, Canada's action plan to repeal the Indian Act. Well, you have to give us something back to look after our people. You know, talk about economics, health, housing. There's no need that we should be treated equal with the milk and honey that comes out of this land. Like, why are we beggars in our own lands? And quit entertaining the Métis people on this repealing the Indian Act, Canada's action plan. There's no consultation, unconstitutional. And when it comes to treaty rights, AFN don't speak for my nation. That's why I'm here today. It's very scary. Quit entertaining Métis people and original people of these lands, right? All our needs should be met. Why are there homeless people right across Turtle Island? It's not right. I don't agree with everything you say. I don't agree with ministers. I don't agree with premiers. You know, we should have been had a seat at the table when they're talking right now at the first minister's meeting. Where's our say? Right? That's racist right there when we're not invited at those tables. So something's got to change. You know, if you're going to do away with this Indian Act, you have to give us something back so we can support the needs of our communities across Turtle Island. You know, the people are suffering and something has to change. That's why I come here today, to get my voice heard. Otherwise, it would never be heard. So thank you for having me here today. But something has to change. And quit entertaining the Métis. They don't own no land. They wouldn't have no land if it wasn't for First Nations right across Canada. Masi.
Thank you. Microphone 1.
Byron Lewis, Chief Lee Okanagan Band. And this morning we had a discussion. It was on UN DRIP, and I think that's one of my biggest concerns, and one of the reasons why I don't fully support UN DRIP is this mention of minimal standards of meeting such things as food, social, and ceremonial use, and this is what it more or less gets to, because in Canada we have a lot of experience with government on what a minimal standard means. And when I brought up earlier on was the example of even for social, social assistance on reserve, where it has $175 for a single male or female, and yet off reserve it is not at that level. And what we're talking about is a minimal standard of a social safety net that cannot even be met. And I think this is something that must be clearly understood if you come to talk to our people. We're talking about the full expression and definition of our rights. That is what we're talking about, and that includes not only the actual right, but also all the social and economic, because we're always talking about a right, but we never do talk about the economic component of a right. And that should actually apply to even points that come out of such things as a Marshall decision, where they said a moderate livelihood. To us, we're the only ones that are defined on that, and the full expression of that is that we are able to achieve what we're able to gain through our own efforts, and also based upon our Aboriginal rights. And, we have to move away from any type of understanding. And as far as I'm concerned, the one thing that should never be a part of First Nations vocabulary is minimal standards, because the impacts that's done to us. And I think for that, and when we're talking about the establishment of our rights to self-government, that also includes our ability to develop and implement laws that are parallel to current laws, and being able to have implementation by, oh God, what's the word for that? Well, I'll move on. And, and the other thing is, amendments to bills that, like Section 2.2, Bill 15 on the rights of Indigenous peoples, which is based upon Section 35 common law, that relies heavily on the doctrine of discovery to explicitly, and for government to explicitly reject the doctrine of discovery. We always say that the Pope should actually reject. No, the state, Canada, must reject the doctrine of discovery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Lewis. And one more online. It looks like Chief Lee Spehan. If we can have Chief Spehan unmuted, please, and your camera turned on. Go ahead.
Quest Lee Spehan Cook Piven Salatku. Hello, Police Band, Chief Co-Order Band, thank you for your speech, Minister Lametti, on UNDRIP and what Canada has done so far. I guess in regards to UNDRIP, what I didn't hear you say was what principles are in the action plan. And is redress going to be part of that? There's been a lot of discussions and meetings, both federally and provincially. But one thing the governments never want to talk about is redress. And will that be added in to the action plan? And is that a commitment that Canada can put forward as part of that? My question to you, Minister. Cookstamp, thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you very much for those questions. I'm going to start at the end with the fourth, with Chief Lee Span. The principles that are in the action plan are respect for nations, self-determination, respecting the autonomy and the traditions of First Nations, and that's the fundamental point. And the action plan itself is something we use as a process to work together, and we can address questions like redress through the basic principles that are articulated in the action plan itself. So again, I'm optimistic that this will be transformational in a number of different ways. And the point, and it's a point that I take from Chief Wilton Littlechild, who I see sitting over there, is that we get to restart the race and we get to run it together for the first time. And I think anything is possible. So back to question one, Derek from Treaty 4, Chief Derek. I had begun a consultation process with respect to gaming in order to learn more about it. I used another private member's bill as cover to undertake those discussions. I went as far as I could with that process. You're absolutely right. There was a deliberate inclusion of the subject of gaming in the action plan as something that we had to study. That's there in large part because of those discussions that we had, and it is something that we need to continue to look at. And I'm open to looking at that private member's bill. There's been no decision taken on it yet. With respect to the Chief Collick, a number of different points. Your point about consultation is well taken. We tried to consult as far as possible on the action plan with not just regional organizations or the AFN, but also nations and treaty nations and modern treaty nations as best we could. To the extent we didn't do it, we're going to continue to work with nations directly if they want to work with us directly to fill in the gaps where we missed something in the action plan. The Indian Act is, I think, something that many of us would like to see in past tense. It's done a lot of damage. On the other hand, we leave it up to individual nations to decide when they are ready, and we will work with individual nations as part of the action plan in terms of how to get out from the Indian Act. Question of Métis rights, I know, is important to many of you, and it is not something that I, as a 60-year-old non-Indigenous person, is going to have the answer to. It's something that we're going to have to work together to get the answer to. But I do think that listening and understanding, I certainly am listening to you today, and I've heard this comment a number of times today, not just here, but in prior sessions, is something that First Nations from coast to coast to coast have raised. And so I know it's important to you, and we'll have to underline that issue and move forward. I think the action plan provides us with a way forward to change the kinds of things you were complaining about, Chief, with reason. And I do think that this represents our best way. This represents our best way forward. It may represent our only way forward. I don't have a magic wand to erase the impacts of colonialism overnight. Anybody who pretends they have that is misleading you. I don't have that. What I have is a commitment to work with you step by step, to reverse piece by piece. I often say stripping away the layers of colonialism, identifying them and stripping them away. That's the best I can do. That's what I can promise, to do my best. Frankly, anybody who promises instantaneous results is misleading you. Chief Lewis, UNDRIP isn't about minimal standards. It's about a plan to get to the best possible set of best possible outcomes. And I mean that. We're committing to this process for that reason. If there were minimal standards in legal decisions like the Marshall decision, I think the action plan helps us to push, by working together, helps us to push to better places. It allows. I think the action plan is something that, for example, allows me as Minister of Justice to do more work with you on the revitalization of Indigenous legal systems. It's work that I've already started with respect to a number of projects, over 20 across Canada, that I have undertaken since I've become Minister to help revitalize Indigenous legal systems as certain nations want them revitalized. And so there's no single plan. There are 20 different ones, 20 different projects. And I'm something that I've believed in long before I went into politics. And I'm going to continue to work in that regard. And I think the action plan helps in that regard. And finally, the preamble to the law that we brought in 2 years ago rejects the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius. And again, it's something that I've said publicly. It's something that I taught was bunk long before I came into politics. And so I believe that, and I'm going to continue working with you to undo the impacts of that. So thank you.
One more, final one. Thank you, Minister Lametti. I do see a number of chiefs at the microphones. Chiefs, you have instructed us to get to your resolutions, and we need to get back to your resolutions. With the time allocation, one more, so final speaker. We're following the same order, microphone number 1.
Okay, thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, Minister. My name is Frank McKay. I'm a proxy for Sachico Lake First Nation. And what I want to talk to you about and bring to your attention is that in the northern remote communities of northern Ontario, where Sachico Lake's from, we're remote and isolated community. And there's only one way to go into our community, and that's to fly in. We fly all our materials and supplies and passengers, and we rely on the air service for essential services in emergencies, as times of emergencies. One of the things that we have continued to raise with the federal provincial governments is the opiate crisis that our First Nations have in our First Nation. And 2 weeks ago in Sachico Lake there was a drug overdose. And it was very devastating to the community that there was not enough effort put forth to try to not allow drugs to get into illegal drugs to come into our communities. And this is what's happening into our communities now. And what we try to do is we have our own laws in relation to how we combat illegal drugs and alcohol to come into our community. And the pushback that we have is the federal and the provincial government does not support or recognize our community laws in relation to how we want to control the flow of drugs coming to our community. We have our own, from our own funds, security, to have security at the airport, just like what we have at the airports in Halifax, Toronto, and so forth. They have security that does that, and we do the same. We do the same in our remote communities because we're isolated. We don't. There's no resources for us to be able to have a full-fledged security system, and we have a police service, but that's undermanned. We have a hard time recruiting police officers to police our
30 seconds.
police officers. So what I'm trying to tell you is that we need support in that area. We want to prevent the loss of life of our young people in our communities. And we want you to support those efforts by the community by establishing these security systems, because the laws that you have, it does not work for our remote communities because we're at distance. So that's what I wanted to bring your attention to. Thank you.
Thank you. I am truly, I send out my heart with respect to the victims of the opioid crisis in many of your communities, and I pledge to work with my colleagues and with you, the Minister of Public Safety, but also the Minister of Health, Minister of Mental Health, Minister Crown Indigenous Relationships, Minister of Northern Affairs. We have to find solutions. Having a greater role played by your laws in your communities and your security surely is one of the solutions. So I take that suggestion to heart. So thank you.
Time-wise, how's your time? I gotta go. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Minister. I just want to closing gift here for you, and thank you for your time and your openness to be working with us and moving forward in a good way. Thank you.
Thank you.